and welcome to Infosec Pros. I'm Kayne, Field CISO at Hyperproof, and I'm joined today by Mark Sayewich, Customer Security Evangelist at Guidewire. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Hi, Kane. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm glad that you're here. And because this is a live stream, if you've got a question from Mark or a question about Guidewire or a question about Hyperproof, please drop it in the comments on either LinkedIn or on YouTube, and we'll take those as we go. And one piece of housekeeping before we start, and this one's new. Mark's asked us to read a disclaimer, so I'm going to try and read this. I'm going to sound official. The views and opinions of those expressed on the panel are not those of the speakers. They do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the company or entity they represent. Now, I've always hoped to represent an entity, preferably an alien one, so I'm going to hope that I'm being controlled by aliens for this show. But we've been trying to make this episode happen for a while now, Mark. Remind me, when did we actually first meet, and what the heck is it you do?
Oh, darn good question there, Kane. For one thing, it's an absolute pleasure to be here on the show. I've been told quite often that I have a beautiful face for radio, and I've got the mic here at least to enhance my voice a bit. Now, we met, would have been 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago at ISC2 Security Congress. I had transitioned into the security program at Guidewire Software, and we created this thing called Customer Security Evangelism. Well, the fact we didn't create it, we had this program. And I did a talk on why every company needs a customer security evangelist, or why we need a customer security evangelism program. Now, it's quite interesting. I find customer security evangelism involves a lot of talking, a lot of speaking, a lot of explaining. As you know, in security itself, we talk about a lot of different things. We have our own language, our own different ways of connecting. As you were saying a moment ago, it's almost like we're on another planet. And then you have the business, which has their specific lingo and things that they want to talk about. And we need a way to bridge the gap between those two things. And there's always 11 billion questions that every single customer has. The analogy that I have, and I said it there at ISC2, was that picture a kid has a summer job. It's his first job at a mom and pop shop. And he's there, and behind the till, someone's coming up to bring some stuff to be paid for. And suddenly they're about to pay for it. They bring their card. They're about to tap. And if the person behind says, "Oh, wait a second, how do I know you don't have some kind of doohickey behind there that's going to steal my personally identifiable information?" Well, I can tell you that that kid is probably going to say, "I have no idea what PII is." And that's where this program comes up. You need the ability to enable that person in front of the counter to have those answers so they can understand and communicate it to the customer. Because if you keep saying, "I don't know," and "I have no idea," you'll take your business elsewhere. And that's where I think the sweet spot is from now in the future, considering we have this amazing, savvy amount of people out there who can just look things up and call you on it immediately.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point there, Mark, because often the language of cybersecurity professionals and the language of business is disconnected, sometimes to great comic effect, where you tell executives about something like, "Hey, we're gonna reduce your attack surface," or "We're going to deal with ransomware," and they might have seen the term in the newspaper, but it doesn't connect at all to a decision that they're planning on making that day, that week, or that they even feel appropriately informed to make decisions about. And I can
Exactly.
see in our current cost, I guess we could call it a cost conscientious world of cybersecurity right now in 2025. I can see that's probably something that's affecting conversations, right? Where if the business doesn't see the value of the thing, even if the technical people all see the value of the thing, whatever it is, some kind of new control, some kind of new, and when I say control, people, processes, and technology, that last
That's
one,
right.
right? Like
That's
let's
right.
let's if it's some tool, if folks don't get it, if the business doesn't get it, I could see a lot of deals going to die, when they get to budgetary planning. Are you seeing that as well, where there's just that disconnect in language?
It is. It is. Language is a big thing. Um, Again, pulling back on history here of being a dad and it feels like you need to be a parent in this particular case to kind of explain how things work into a language and make it all into stories. Like take for example, we were talking about shared responsibility and all this wonderful language in general. When you think about it, um, people don't necessarily understand what they own, what everybody else owns when it comes to these types of things. So again, I try to pull things into stories or analogies so that people can kind of pull it in. Because as you said, when you're talking about these different languages, it becomes very challenging to figure out what the person means. But if you pull it to something that they can relate to, it makes it easier. Like, take the cloud. People
Mhm.
think of the fact that if I take something and throw it on the cloud, that's it. Safe. It's great. Who wants to move everything up to the cloud because, of course, somebody else is going to take care of that stuff. It's like mom and pop saying, "Hey, you know what? It's God. It's my house. It's fine." But in reality, that's not the case. We know for a fact when I move into, say, a high, um, if I have a building, one of those nice high rise, really a great place to live. I may have a front desk. The person has there's a counter and there's locks on the doors to get into the building itself. We know that the property management itself are going to take care of the building. They're going to make sure things are there. So some people assume that, well, everything's secure, but in reality, the cloud, when we relate this to the cloud, each one of the apartment buildings are like a different tenant that is physically on the cloud itself. You may have locked down the entrance to the building, but each one of the doors up there, they're unlocked or not locked. It's up to you. It's your responsibility to take care of that. So translating the business needs and the customer's needs and understanding who owns what and how these things work are always quite a challenge.
Yeah, and something that we've seen realistically, just going with your locked doors or unlocked doors analogy, is that companies are being told, they're being regulated, there are laws being made. There's certainly extraterritorial regulation coming out of the European Union that says y'all have to do security better. Even if we can't tell you what security is, y'all have to do it better. And I can see that in your role as a customer security evangelist, you probably see a lot of the challenges in this space. So when you think about our emerging federalist hellscape that we have here, where we're going to have 50 different sets of domestic laws for privacy and a different set of 50 for cybersecurity, and then we're going to have a European Union version that gets overlaid over top of that, and Canada might weigh in as well as the rest of the Five Eye countries, right? That's
Mhm.
going to make for a really complicated state of play when trying to figure out how do we do security and what are we required to do. So from your perspective, what are some of the biggest challenges that you see that your companies are facing when they're trying to prioritize that security, and what are they doing to make sense of all of this?
Good question. Good question. Um, it's all about communication and responsibility. Leaning back on what we said a moment ago when we were talking about how people assume everything is oy vey.
They assume
You
it's
know,
going to be, you put it on somebody else's computer. It's got to be better than your computer. Never mind their cost and expense structure, right? That they're trying to minimize that.
exactly, exactly. You assume that uh, once it's there, it's going to be perfectly fine. But it takes an entire tribe to pull all this the team together to discuss what needs to be done. What tends to happen with a lot of these cloud-based companies is people will throw it up there and assume it's correct, but they don't read the contract or see what's inside of there and what you're responsible for and what someone else is responsible for. So ensuring that you understand who's responsible for what, and if not, asking the teams what they need to do and what they're responsible for is definitely the way to go.
Now, is that asking the
Sorry about
vendors
that.
teams, or is that asking the internal teams, or is that both?
It just that it's a collection of both of them. Knowing uh, who is responsible for what and at what time is very important. Oh, sorry, I'm gonna grab some water.
Sure. Okay. So, as a reminder to our audience as well, this is a live broadcast. So, if you've got questions for Mark or for me, just please do drop those in the chat. We will take those live. But I want to go back to something you were saying there, Mark, because it sounds like companies may have incorrect misunderstandings or assumptions still, despite having had the cloud for 10, 15, I'm not sure when SaaS applications are, it feels like it's been way more than a decade. It feels like they've been around for a bit. So companies apparently still have got misconceptions about this. So how do you help them reset those expectations so they don't just, YOLO their PII or other regulated data into the cloud and go, it must be your fault, not mine.
That's a darn good question. It's almost like when you're talking to your kids and they say, "Why? Why do I have to do this? Why do we have to do these types of things?" Well, it's important to understand early who is responsible for what, and to man, it's funny. I always like pulling in analogies when it comes to these types of things, and at the moment my mind is feeling a little bit blank. I'm gonna have a little bit more water, and sorry about that, game. Don't think I answered your question there.
No, that's okay. We can come back to it.
Mm,
It's really
mm.
about resetting expectations associated with cloud-based security. And I think that if nothing else, the recent acquisition or the proposed acquisition of Wiz by Google, I think really does show there is a need or there's a perceived need on the part of companies, especially in a multi-cloud environment, to be able to secure their cloud-based security software, even if they don't know exactly what that means at a business level. Are there things that you're starting to see that are pushes to improve that security?
Could you rephrase that question? Sorry about that.
Sure, sure. Just when you're resetting expectations, that you're not going to set up everything for them. Let's work an example. Like let's say your cloud-based software offers multi-factor authentication, right?
Yep.
You're probably not going to turn it on for them. And you probably have some kind of password sort of thing that says, you can have a password if you want. You probably should have a password, but you're probably not going to say, well, that's a terrible password, right?
Mm.
And so is that what you're starting to see, like that, just that baseline assumption, like if you choose a rubbish password and don't turn on multi-factor authentication and have a data breach, that's actually on you. It's not necessarily on us because you chose a garbage password.
Beautiful example. Thank you for bringing that in. Brain was somewhere else for a moment. Yeah, that's hard. Again, if I was like, if someone was bringing something into my house, everyone would assume that everything inside of my house is safe and I take care of everything. But going back to the analogy we were talking about when it comes to the whole apartment buildings, it's not just your house. You were talking about passwords in general. Now, you lay out what people are supposed to do, but it's on them if they decide not to. But this is
Mhm.
where the whole idea of having an evangelist comes in, laying out the groundwork and the foundation of what the expectations are and educating them, saying, hey, you know what? You probably shouldn't do that. If you decide to, that's on you, but it's not necessarily a good idea. And here are the reasons why. We, we've heard quite often that you're supposed to, well, sorry, when it comes to all this, when you're moving to the cloud in general, you do want to get security in as soon as possible. Everyone talks about that. We talk about in development that you want to pull the development teams, you want to put the graphic teams all into the left as soon as possible so that they can get that information. Because once you get out to the end of the situation, it's in production, it costs a heck of a lot more to maintain those things or to go back in and find out where the problems are. Having this strategy of waiting until you have an incident to go back in and fix the things is never a good thing.
I wouldn't say so, no. But there's an unlimited number of potential controls that an organization could implement. I mean, if you go read, well, if you're if you really want to hurt yourself, go read NIST 853. If you're a realist, go read NIST CSF or ISO 27001 or the CISCSC. Right? There are all kinds of controls, but not all of them are going to have a positive impact for an organization. And not all controls have to be implemented in the same way, right? You can achieve the same outcome manually, you can do it automated, you can have some kind of blend. So from your vantage point, what controls are you seeing right now that are making the biggest difference in reducing risk to organizations' cloud footprint?
Clean and to the point. Access, monitoring, and automation. Of course, there's 11 billion different controls we could throw everywhere.
Hmm.
But if you don't think through letting people in or who's going to be able to have access, that does become an issue. Um, I always think of it as well, think about this. Um, if we had a car, someone created a brand new car, came off the lot, and it's
Hmm.
beautiful. And you notice this car can go incredibly fast, and it's beautiful. It's great color. It's exactly what we need and what we want. And then someone comes up and says, "Well, tell me about the brakes." Oh, we don't have any brakes. We actually have airbags because we found that apparently we read somewhere that's all you need. You'd probably go somewhere else. One of the basic things that you'd expect is to have brakes inside of the car. And again, the three that I brought up is having access control. It's one of the basic things you'd want to have.
Hmm.
And monitoring, because you want to be able to make sure that when something happens, you can respond to it as quickly as possible. Teams that have set up monitoring systems are able to respond to their threats much quicker than the ones who don't. And finally, automation. Doing things by hand takes a lot longer. There's tons of mistakes that happen in, around, and about. And having automation make sure that things are repeatable and can be done uh, in a repeatable global process and monitorable and auditable.
You know what I love about your list there, and my apologies, I scribbled it down here, of having access and monitoring and automation. I think those are terms that you could probably convey to another business executive, right? I think that's probably going to be a lot easier than going and talking to them about a CV or an APT or, goodness
100%.
help us, we're going to say, well, there's 0 days in the world, right? I can see there's just that's where our language disconnect comes back, where we're not, like, I can see you tied your analogy of having a car that doesn't have brakes but has airbags. You can tie that back to a risk, right?
Mm,
And businesses, I think, effectively make informed decisions about controls, in my opinion, when those are tied back to risks. So I want to. I'm going to put the question from the audience on hold just for 1 second. Thank you for that. I just want to go down this risk assessment path just a little bit further. Something that I see organizations do is they try to, smart ones, try to map their risks to their controls and make sure that their controls are mitigating their risks. But I think
mm,
risk
mm,
assessments aren't always done well. Are you
mm.
seeing any progress in risk assessment techniques that specifically focus on cloud security risks?
Again, I'm going to try to get straight, direct to the point. I've tried to be thinking about these sorts of things earlier. When it comes to the collection of risks, the things that, in my opinion, work best are threat modeling, automated scanning,
Hmm.
and let's say using penetration testing. And then, of course, prioritizing your risk. Because the fact is, there's lots of things that could go wrong, but referring to the business and finding out what exactly is more important to them. Um, Take, for example, going back to the building analogy itself, one would assume that in the building itself that there'd be regular maintenance going on. The risk being that if you don't take care of the building, it's going to fall apart itself. Uh, but if something happened inside of that building and you found out later the fact that it none of that did happen, uh, you know what? That analogy just fell apart. You try to do something dynamically and it just doesn't work. The point being is that if you did a threat assessment of a building itself, of what potentially could go wrong, and
Hmm.
you didn't try it out to make sure that it actually would work in a real situation, you're going to have a bad day.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point that I think companies can over-index on is the theoretical as opposed to the practical. I think it's very possible for organizations, and this I think is I think it's a sign of younger or newer CISOs who over-index on shiny things as opposed to practical outcomes. Ultimately, you can always worry about whatever the North Koreans are up to today, or whatever the Chinese are up to today, or whatever the various other APT crews are up to today. But something that I see where companies go wrong is they don't look at basic business resiliency. Like, we years ago, we used to think we could prevent all the breaches. Well, some people thought we could prevent all the breaches. I remember there were products that claimed that they could prevent all the breaches, or prevent all the ransomware, prevent all the things from happening bad. That
Mm,
doesn't happen anymore. That's just not
mm,
reality anymore. We have to figure out, how do we endure, and how do we have continuity of operations, which is what our suppliers and our customers and our regulators expect, through whatever the disaster of the day happens to be. And ultimately, we have to be able to prove that we did reasonable steps to make sure that we had a continuity of operations, opposed to, we just figured we'd make it up as we go along. I think that MGM just recently had a fairly bad time on that one, where I'm thinking of the Nebraska law that came out that said, you're okay unless you're doing gross negligence. So you know what the regulators are going to go look for now? They're going to be looking for gross negligence. But I
yeah.
want to take a question from the audience, and I want to thank our audience for the questions. Please do keep dropping those in the chats on LinkedIn and on YouTube, and we'll take them live. And so the question is, I like this one. As cloud security continues to evolve, what are the key trends that you think are going to shape the industry in the coming years? Oh boy, pull out your magic 8 ball.
Trends in what respect? In how we keep ourselves safe, or
Yeah,
threats that are going to attack us? Um,
ooh, both. Why don't you take one side? I'll take the
oh,
other side. We can argue it.
oh, that sounds cool. Okay, so for a fact, going back in time, the whole aspect of security, where it all came from, the fact that people would play and hack around and to remotely connect into some other system and make things explode on their system, turn their screens upside down. And people would see that. It's kind of fun. And there'd be tools, so people would write and start throwing that out there. And you have these script kiddies who now start looking at all these different tools and seeing what's out there, like, hey, cool, and start running it everywhere. Now that we're moving into this amazing, wonderful AI age that everyone is talking about, I believe we're going to have tons of scenarios hitting machines, hitting applications that we can't even fathom. And what I used to say before the whole AI thing was, it's going to be some guy, some 5-year-old in some country somewhere who's hitting a certain key combination that breaks into a system that no one thought about. We
Hmm.
now have 11 billion of these little guys out there because people will be running at least 20 or 30 of them on their local machines.
Hmm.
So I think the way we're going to stay on top of that in general is what you said before, going back to basics. We There are these shiny new objects that everybody wants. And yes, AI can be there to help, but it's just that, to me, treating them specifically as helpers, as interns. They can do it a hell of a lot better than us, but it still is going to take some brains to interpret what the data is. I think that's where the sweet spot is going to be in the future, where you're going to see some amazing changes. Because I don't know if you've spent much time coding with these new AI stuff. It's awesome. You can literally just type in 3 or 4 lines and this beautiful code comes out and it's running. But if you
Hmm.
actually look at what's going on inside of it, oh my gosh, it's insane. Well, sometimes it's beautiful code. Quite often, it looks like someone who has literally copied and pasted things out of a textbook, which is usually the way a beginning programmer works. But things are going to go live with that in the future. I kind of think that's going to be a new, huge risk area. Well, what do you think?
Well, I think that right now everybody could bring up your favorite search engine and type
Yeah.
in vibe-based coding, or type in the word wild and
Mm,
vibe-based coding, and you're going to see what happened this week, because there are multiple folks out there who fully acknowledged on social media that, hey, I'm not a programmer and my application is under attack now, and the
yeah.
API calls are doing weird things, and the database is filling up, and I don't know why. And it's
Yeah.
because they decided that they'd build their entire application stack out of AI, where they just have the AI write the whole thing, And as you've pointed out correctly, Mark, that often will result in code failures. I think one of the, or code risks, I think one of the larger
Mm,
systemic issues that we face is the dependency of, and I think I can't cite where I saw the paper, but I've seen a paper that showed the behavior of programmers after they start using artificial intelligence at scale, their behaviors change, and
mm,
not necessarily for the better. And instead of triaging and figure out what is the root cause here, just go to the quickest, fastest, easiest solution, bang, done. And that's what's resulting in some of this code deficiencies, where they're making mistakes, where there are
yeah.
risks being introduced into the code base. And if we don't have that discipline of software engineering, if we don't have that discipline of actually doing proper triage, I think that as companies, I think there's I admit, many, many years ago, back when dinosaurs roamed the internet, I was briefly doing coding, and I remember one of the measures that we had was KLOC, thousands of lines of code, right? And
Sure.
you had defects per KLOC, defects for thousands of lines of code. And if you had a software engineering manager, they'd always try and push down the number of defects per KLOC, right? These
It's a
days, I
stat, right?
see it is a stat, and it's a meaningful one. It shows if your code is getting better or worse over time. These days, what we're seeing, though, is there is a financial incentive for organizations to push code out faster, to push features out faster, to push them out not necessarily in the most robust or engineered fashion, where you'd be looking at metrics like how many defects do you have for thousands of lines of code here, but rather how fast can we get this thing out of to market and then hope you fix it in post. You combine that with vibes-based coding, I think we've got this dangerous situation where companies are going to hire new programmers who don't really know what they're doing. They maybe took a programming class, maybe they're just using an AI, and they went, hey, let's do this, let's get this out. It'll help this manager make their bonus, it'll help me make my bonus, right? Because there are financial incentives that happen here perversely. I think that becomes material risk, doesn't it? Where the imperative and the incentive to get the feature out, to make the bonus so you can reduce your mortgage payment or your student loan debt or whatever the heck it is, that starts to become a side, a related risk to the business, doesn't it? The way we're
One,
incentivizing software development.
but see, that's been a, here's the thing, that has been around forever, but it's just got magnified.
Hmm.
We have, I hate to say this, we have two sides of the fence. It's a relationship here. We have the business needs, and then we have the implementation, which is where security lies. Now, with that, of course, if you don't get a product out, you can't make money. So it doesn't matter if it's secure or insecure. If you're not getting revenue generated, your company's going to disappear. So it's a interesting line you have to walk when it
Hmm.
comes to these sorts of things, because um, the business does want to get things out, and just like with development itself, we always say, look, get it out there, get it out the door, we can always pull it in later.
Hmm.
But that's where all these breaches come, or sorry, data loss. Apparently we're not supposed to say the B word. It's apparently a
Yeah, your
trigger
attorneys
thing
will
for a
tell
lot
you,
of
please don't use that word. And as a two times two, so I can say I use
whether
that word very carefully in
that's
relation
right,
to anything that's going on. But you're right,
possible
like
one.
software development here is it definitely poses, it can either increase or decrease risks.
Hmm.
So when you think about this, what are some of the things that software developers could do to reduce those risks and to avoid those security pitfalls?
Oh, I'm gonna tell you, why did the why did the security developer or the developer cross the roadmap?
Okay, why did they cross the roadmap?
Because he wanted to shift left.
It's the first time I've
Okay,
liked the use of that term.
here's the thing. It makes sense. Absolutely, any and everyone wants to pull things in early. When it
Mhm,
comes to development, when it comes to security, we want to pull it in as early as possible. the issue with moving fast in a lot of these areas is that if you move too fast and not think of what happens, you get hurt. Now, the problem is people don't want to pull security in early because they say it's just going to slow us down. So the challenge, of course, is pulling us both in together at the right time. At the very least, letting the security team know, hey, look, dude, we're working on this stuff. Here's some stuff. And creating a rapid risk assessment. I don't know if you've heard of that before. You have its dozen or so questions. Literally just saying, are you using personally identifiable information in your application? Do you have any PCI related information inside of your code? And as you're building it, of course, they'll say, no, 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 no. But if you start letting them understand, we're not saying this to punish you. We're saying it so that we can say, okay, cool. Here's some things you should look out for. Because if you do these modeling of threats, conveniently called threat modeling, early in your design phase, they help in the long run. Also, if you get on top of doing this at the beginning, as time progresses, you can reuse those things. As you make changes, modifications, or, God forbid, when something does happen, you can start looking at that, seeing where the threats are, changing your threat model to say, we never thought of this vector before. Does this affect absolutely anywhere else?
And that sounds like something that is, there's a generic set of risks, I think, that all organizations would face, but there's also
Mm,
specific risks and threats that some organizations would face. So you're saying that
that's right.
that organizations could take and you've mentioned a term that I think some folks would think is kind of esoteric, the threat modeling conversation. You've just made it a little more accessible. Right. So are there other resources that you can think of that maybe our listeners who've been wondering, like, how do I do threat modeling? Can you think of anything off the top of your head, or like just a checklist of simple things that organizations should do when introducing threat modeling into their organization?
Uh, eh, use ChatGPT to help you know. It's funny. I tried to think through some of the things we were talking about, and I thought, oh, I got a list. I tend to overthink at times to make sure that I've tried to put things in. Threat modeling, definitely. One thing that would help with that itself um, is to create a picture of how things work. Because
Hmm.
that's actually the essence of how you model something. You draw circles around it and say, here's where we are, here's the other things we're connecting into. And you start putting boundaries in there saying, now, if I go from here to here, where are the things? How do these things connect? And what I enjoy is a picture. A picture is worth 1,000 words. There's two technologies out there that I've really gotten into lately, and I just cannot say enough of them. For one thing, when looking at a system, the way that systems are built and the way these things work in general, looking at C4 diagrams. And
C4, like the letter
C,
C, like C for cat, and then the number four.
absolutely, and it's not explosive. It is specifically dealing at different levels of architecture. Picture the way they describe it. If you look at this online, I seriously say, go out, look at this, just to describe how your systems work. It's almost like looking at a Google map. So you
Hmm.
picture a system from a higher level, which is the first part of the C4 diagram, and you can go down to the next level, and finally down to the inner workings of the code. If you start drawing these pictures as you're starting to build, it allows you to have these communications both with different development people very quickly, but also with higher level management. Because sometimes, I don't know if you've ever looked at some of these architectural diagrams, you actually need a degree in the specific terminology and lingo of how that particular company uses things. But by using something like C4, it allows you to zoom in, zoom out, and there's a whole philosophy behind it. And secondly, Wardley diagrams. Have you heard of Simon Wardley?
The name rings a bell, but for our viewers who haven't heard of Simon Wordley.
Okay, so let's see. This is YouTube. So over here, it'll be here when we do this in post. No, just kidding. Um, so what a Wordley map is a way to map strategy. Now, there's a lot of work that's been out there connecting mapping strategy to security, which you got to get into. It's amazing. But here's the essence of a Wordley map. You start off with your users. Who are the people who are interested in the system? Cool. Now, users have needs. So you literally draw a circle between the user and the need. Then you think, what are the components that are required to fulfill that need? So there's little circles underneath that, and you can draw, and yay, you have a value chain.
Hmm.
Cool. So it shows you, this is my user, this is what I need to get there. Now, the cool thing is you can put that onto a map. Now, what is a map? People say, oh, yeah, we all use maps. It's so cool. We have an architecture. No. A map is something that gives you direction and gives you a place in time. Like, take, for example, if you're looking at the subway system. In the subway system itself, you see where all the lines go, and it doesn't necessarily map out where it physically is in the world, but you
Hmm.
have a good understanding. I am here. I want to go there. With Wardley mapping, you take specific things that you're looking for and you place them on a grid. And on one side of the grid, you say, look, this is brand new. No one's ever done this before. We've never done it in our company. On
Hmm.
the other side, they call it the commodity side. This is where, yeah, I'm going to go out and pay someone to do this for me. That's kind of where you want to get everything to go. So by placing all these items onto the graph, it allows you to strategically look at it from a 50,000 foot view and start seeing what needs to have some work done or where you should concentrate your efforts. The really cool thing about that is sometimes you have these conversations where people think they should spend their time to develop and do things because it kind of makes sense and it's what the business said. But
Hmm.
if you map what the business is saying to what you physically have, some areas that they maybe want to concentrate on, you may already have commoditized that in such a way that you're just putting extra cash in. It's great. It's no longer an expense coming off of your team. And you can start seeing where you need to start moving things. Okay, I've gone on a bit of a tangent, but
No, but
seriously, Wordly
that
maps
is
and
really
C4
useful.
diagrams.
So wordly maps and C4 diagrams sound like they could help in the software development process to make sure that we're implementing appropriate controls. I
Heck
want
yeah.
to go back to something from your notes from earlier today, where you said monitoring, and because we often talk, a lot of CISOs sincerely believe, there's statistics out there that say we all believe, or most of us believe, that continuous monitoring is a security best practice and it's going to improve things. But I think you and I both know how it's being done and how that's being interpreted, it's a bit of a grab bag, honestly. So, from your perspective, I'm going to set aside like FedRAMP's ConMon, for example. Like, let's set aside that or the NIS2 requirements on continuous monitoring. Like, overall, what what do you see as the benefit of continuous monitoring or continuous testing for reducing risks, and what can organizations do to ensure that they're doing it in a meaningful and effective way?
So the what and whys of monitoring itself.
Hmm.
So it is simply about proactive defense. That's what you can boil all of it down to. I like how that came up there. Continuous monitoring. Oh man. um, by detecting threats in real time, you have a higher chance of figuring out what needs to be done at that particular point in time and being able to address them. Um, I like to think of continuous monitoring like a security guard.
Okay.
Following back to the whole analogy again to the apartment building,
Hmm.
you have two types of security guards you can have in that building. One of them is the one who'll go around, take a look around, and then sit back at the desk for the rest of his shift. You have the other one who has this collection of cameras looking at everything that's happening on the system, seeing when things aren't happening, testing all the doors on a regular basis, continually checking things. And I don't know you, I'd feel much more secured with the secondary one. Quite often, people tend to lean on the first one when it comes to monitoring and looking for things. By proactively having monitoring of the logs and automating, pulling that information out to alert people and having
Hmm.
people assessing it, it ensures that we can, again, stay on top of it and address a potential issue before it happens or see what's there.
And that's monitoring of our own systems, right? We're monitoring the application, we're monitoring how well it's running, and that's something that an organization can do. Something I was giving a talk last night at an ISC2 chapter, and the question came up about threat intelligence. And I'm going to paraphrase the question from last night, and it was about the idea of, should we use threat intelligence? Should we use dark web monitoring? Because that's something that they'd heard was fairly common for looking outside of their organization's monitoring to figure out, hey, what are the threats we should be worried about? Because you can monitor your own application, but if you're not monitoring the right things, like what's actually going on in the world for how threat actors are behaving. So is that something that organizations should start to think about once they've got their own threat assessment done, once they've actually tried to build secure code, once they've got their own house in order for monitoring? Should they start thinking about either threat intelligence or dark web monitoring? And if they do, is that something you build in-house, or is that something where you go to an external provider?
Thank you, Kayne. Interesting question. I'll give you the consultant answer to start.
Okay. It's going to be, it depends, right?
It depends. Right? When it comes to that, again, this is falling into the category of proactive defense.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's a great idea to make sure you keep an eye out on something before it potentially happens to stop it in its tracks. Now, again, falling into analogies, man, I love that. We have the whole apartment complex. When you're going through the complex itself, if you don't lock your doors, somebody can get in. Though if you don't lock the door of the apartment itself, but the building, of course, has the locks inside of it. But when you moved into that apartment, did they change the keys? That's almost
Mm-hmm.
like the idea of leaked PII and leaked credentials.
Mm-hmm.
If when you moved into the apartment, you didn't change the locks and you suddenly find out that your keys are on sale on eBay, that's
Mm-hmm.
not a good thing. So using the proactive intelligence or threat intelligence to look for that information is valuable, but it now falls back into what you were saying before. It's a shiny new thing. It's great to have it, but do you have your basics in place first? Of
Mm-hmm.
course, it's darn important. It's great to find out if there's been a leak of a whole bunch of information of people who are in your company itself. And if that happens, you kind of enforce everyone, everyone, go change your password. So that's a great way to do it. Now, whether you do that in-house or externally, again, it depends. Do you have expertise inside of your house? Do you have resources who know how to do this? Can it scale? Can you customize how that works? What are the needs? And again, talking about your jewels, what are you protecting? Now, of course, we want to protect absolutely everything. If you're a company that does a lot of PCI related information, so payment card handling, money,
Right.
that might be a risk that you'd want to look into. But again, making sure that you have your basics first. Did you lock the doors? Are you monitoring what's inside of there? Do you know what's happening? Did you look at the access control lists you currently have on your programs? Are you changing them on a regular basis?
Mm-hmm.
Are you pulling in an auditing team to look at what you currently have and comparing to other well-known standards out there to make sure that you're in compliance, or at least you are in line with what the rest of the world is looking at? Having those in track, to me, are more of a priority. Getting your basics down than falling into threat intelligence. Threat intelligence is great, but again, it depends on how much you have available to spend on this extra collection of things.
Okay, and I think you just hit it there. That's an extra. So organizations need to have these things locked down and have a high degree of confidence then that they've got their access in place, that they've got, I'm referring to your list again, that they've got their monitoring in place, and that they've got some automation in place there, and that they're securely developing their applications before they start looking outside of their own walls. So then let me ask you, as we move to towards the end of the show, I want to ask you a couple questions just back at the top. We were talking about SaaS providers, and you brought up the shared responsibility model and some of the complexities there. If you're not the developer, if you're not building the thing, if you're buying the thing, whatever the thing is, some kind of SaaS solution, right? What is the best way to clarify, to establish, to set boundaries and expectations from the get-go?
Consultant answer. Yeah, it depends. So it depends on what you need. It depends on what your company is doing and what your needs are in general.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would do is look at. Could you rephrase that question? I'm sorry.
Sure, just the best way to, for a customer, if you're buying a SaaS solution, what's the best way to establish expectations up front with the vendor? And I'm asking you this because you probably get this question a lot as a security evangelist, right? And I know that a lot of go-to-market teams get this question too, of like, how do we establish shared responsibility? So if you're a customer of a SaaS provider or you're a prospect, how are you going to set that expectation with them if you think you're doing these things and you think they're doing those things, and make sure there's no ambiguity about that?
Thoughts, feelings, and opinions addressed in this episode are mine and may or may not reflect. No. Look at the contract. Look
Ooh.
at what you're getting into. See what's there. Make sure that you understand what's inside of there. Take it to your legal team to fall back into shared responsibility to find out who is responsible for what and when. You know the old adage about assuming things, and
Mm-hmm.
I guess this is a public-facing area, so we don't necessarily want to go into that, especially if my kids look at it later. But we want to also make sure that we define clear security rules. Don't assume that, oh yeah, the defaults are great. Take a look and see what are the rules. Who has what access, what permission at what particular point in time? What level should they have? What's awesome is to ensure, I'm sure you've seen this, automated identity access management, where literally they give you access just to do the task that you need,
Mm-hmm.
and then they get rid of it for a set
Mm-hmm.
point of time. That's awesome. It's auditable. It's trackable. You see when it was. You can take a look. You can pull it out. That is where we want to go in all these things. You'd also be interested in SLAs, looking at your contracts again, seeing what are the agreements, how long should things happen to keep people in line. Compliance alignment. Are the vendors, do they currently have? Are they associated with certain well-known certifications like
Mm-hmm.
SOC? Are they SOC certified? Are they SOC 1 certified where they said, yep, we're good? Or did they actually go through the due diligence and pull through it and have a regular auditing schedule where they're coming in to make sure that things are happening, and they have a collection of documents stating to you how you pull in your PCI related information, how that should be handled, who's handling it, where it is. Again, assigning where the priorities are. And like data protection responsibilities, like your personally identifiable information, knowing where that is, what it is, what constitutes it for you and where you are. Because if you're an international related company, of course, there are different standards across the world, depending on how you need to be able to take care of that data or destroy that data, the right
Mm-hmm.
to forget. And of course, seeing it incident response plans, like making sure that you understand what that team does, understanding what your team does and who's responsible for what, ensuring that when an incident happens, you're able to communicate back and forth and ensure that you know that you have that clear communication and resolution. And of course, looking at the end to make sure that we understand uh, how we can do better in the future.
Okay, and so you're saying that that is, and I agree with you on that, that it's contractual. So we should be looking at the contract and potentially redlining or having counsel attempt to negotiate those terms and conditions that are going to be in the final contract, that are going to ameliorate some of the issues in a, I'm sorry, I just dropped a $5 word right there on the podcast towards the end, that they're going to address some of those concerns, right, before an incident occurs. Is that a fair way of looking at it? That if you're buying, go read the contract, figure out what the responsibility model is, and anything you don't like, figure that out, get it before you make a purchase, and before, certainly before there's an incident.
Doesn't necessarily have to be before, but you definitely have to have awareness on it. You need to know who's doing what and when, because if you did buy something that's out there and you don't know what's going to happen, that is a bad day. Um,
That is definitely going to be a bad outcome. And I agree with you on that one as well there, Mark, just for getting things understood. So again, just to summarize, so companies should be working on they should be focusing on their access threat model, their
mhm.
monitoring, and then automation for that. And you recommended Wordly and C4.
Yep.
Wordly and C4 maps, I should say, to assess some of these, and then finally reading the contract so that we can understand. Anything else you want to share with our viewers?
Well, with that, it's Wordly Maps. Simon Wordley, the god who's out there, he's got 11 billion streaming podcasts, all specific. It looks like it's the same thing over and over again. But to me, it took me at least, I don't know, 10 times before I started to have it sink in. And it's C4 diagrams, so the two areas
C4
in there.
diagrams.
And with this, at the end of the day, we've all say this all the time, security isn't something you should bolt on. It's something you should build. And whether it's a SaaS platform, a cloud migration, or just a conversation with a customer, the same principles always apply. Be clear about ownership, stay proactive, and don't wait for an incident to start talking about security.
Fantastic. Well, with that, I think we can move to wrap up. I want to thank you for being on the show today, Mark. And if you're watching this and you know somebody who we should have on the show, or alternatively, if you are that person who wants to be on the show, drop a note in the comments or just DM me directly on LinkedIn. With that, Mark, I really want to thank you again for joining us and thank our audience for tuning in for today's live stream. Thanks, everyone, and have a great weekend.
Thank you so very much.